you and I believe it. What if you're holding me up? What if your love is enough? What if the power in your name could do anything? And what if you're making me strong? What if you were here all along? What if I'm right where you want me? I got these thoughts inside my head. What if I don't have what it takes? What if things don't ever change? Then I remember what you said. You will fulfill your promises, and all the questions go away. Whoa, yeah. I know you're holding me up. I know your love is enough. I know the power in your name could do anything, and I know you're making me strong. I know you were here all along. I know I'm right where you want me. I know I'm where I need to be. I know you're holding me up. I know your love is enough. I know the power in your name could do anything, and I know you're making me strong. I know you were here all along. I know I'm right where you want me all along. Whoa, yeah. What if you were right there? Caught up in my feelings. Spent so much time trying to play it safe, but the safety is just an illusion when I'm called to be fearless. So here I come, I wanna follow where you're leading me. Time to let go, it's sink or swim now. So I jump, no matter what the rest. I'm finally diving in. Nothing can hold me back when you hold my hand. So I jump, no fear of what's ahead. I'm trusting you instead. Close my eyes, take a breath and step up to the edge and jump. Now I'm seeing clearly. The fear I held was caging me in, but you set me free with a promise that I'm never abandoned. Oh, so here I come, ready to follow where you're leading me. Time to let go, it's sink or swim now. So I jump, no matter what the rest. I'm finally diving in. Nothing can hold me back when you hold my hand. So I jump, no fear of what's ahead. I'm trusting you instead. Close my eyes, take a breath and step up to the edge and jump. much for my heart. When I'm under pressure, you hold me together. You've always been faithful to remind me you are all that I need, and you I'll ever be thinking you are always with me, even in my darkest hour. You remind me of your love and your faithfulness. Remind me of your ways and I won't forget. It's true. Whenever I need it, you better remind me. You are always there. You're the air that I breathe. Without you in the middle, I don't know where I'd be. Trying to count my blessings, don't know where to begin. Your love is all around me and it's easy to see. When I'm under pressure, you hold me together. I know I can count on you. When everything's crazy, my strength keeps on failing. You've always been faithful to remind me you are all that I need, and you I'll ever be thinking you are always with me, even in my darkest hour. You remind me of your love and your faithfulness. Remind me of your ways and I won't forget. It's true. Whenever I need it, you better remind me. You remind me. Remind me you are all that I need, and I'll ever be thinking you are always with me, even in my darkest hour. You remind me of your love and your faithfulness. Remind me of your ways and I won't forget. It's true. Whenever I need it, you better remind me. You better remind me.
Hey, good morning, North Point. We're glad you're here. Go ahead and stand to your feet. We're going to sing a little bit together. Here we go. I see you move the mountain, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. I see you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me yet. Promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me yet. Oh, I see you do it
You may be seated. That was great. Over in the West, you may be seated as well. And over in the West, what about DJ Dave? Did you enjoy DJ Dave? Over in the West, We're spicing it up over there. But over here in the East, it's all good. It's all good. Hey, welcome back. And if this is your first time back in the church building after being away for a while, we're certainly glad that you're back as well. And if you're joining us online for the first time, or maybe you've been joining us online, but you don't know anything about our church, we have stuff for you whether you live in the Atlanta area or if you live anywhere in the country. So I'd love for you at some point today to just click where it says I'm new at the top of your web browser and find out what we have for you in the city and what we have for you outside the city. If you are in the building with me today, we would also love, we have something special for you over in the West or the East. As you leave today, if you'll go to the lobby, there's a room there, a new facility or a new environment we created called Connections. And it's specifically for people who are trying to get more information about our church. And if you go to Connections today, and especially if you live in the Atlanta area, you're gonna get a free gift. And yes, it is a bribe, but you'll be glad we bribed you, okay? So check it out, meet some of our staff, get some questions answered about our church. The reason this is out here is we had a really, really busy weekend for North Point Community Church, and I want you to know about it because you were a part of it, even if you didn't participate in it. Thursday night, I was here with all the high school seniors from all of our Atlanta area churches, and it was absolutely amazing. We had hundreds, not high school students, just high school seniors, and I got to sit up here and do what I love to do and just teach what I think they need to know as they kind of launch into this new season of life. It was so much fun. If you have kids in middle school or elementary age school, our Inside Out program is so fantastic. And so anyway, that was fun. Then, Friday and yesterday, we had Transit Weekend. Anybody participate in Transit Weekend or your kids did? Yes. Were you here, Bill?
I dropped off and picked up.
You dropped off and picked up. Good. Did they enjoy it?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Transit Weekend, this was so much fun. This is amazing. Even with COVID and schools in and out and some school systems still not back in completely, we had over 2,800 middle schoolers for all of our Atlanta area churches doing this together. This was where you're sitting right now. We had about 680 just middle schoolers from North Point Community Church and about 300 of their leaders. So it was absolutely incredible. And the reason I bring all that up, even though you may not have kids in these age groups, you have done as a local church a fantastic job, all of our Atlanta area churches, of keeping children, middle school and high school students engaged in the life of the local church. And I told you this before, but I brag on you all the time. So many churches were in such a rush to hurry up and get all the adults back in the building. Their children's ministry, middle school, high school ministries, they kind of just flagged a little bit. Now they're trying to play catch up. You prioritized the next generation. And I just can't tell you how proud I am that through your giving, through your patience, through you allowing us to do some of these incredible things before we even put adults back in the building. And if you're a guest here today, or you're looking for a home church, or you're online watching, wondering, I just want you to know, if you were to ask us, hey, what's the faith of the next generation worth? Our answer to that question is it's worth everything. So you're doing it, and you're doing a fantastic job, and I just wanted to thank you and brag a little bit. Now, to keep the next generation engaged and involved, I need you to do something for your local church. And I'm gonna be very specific in a few minutes. But because of what I wanna ask you to consider doing, I decided to set that up by just jumping right in to the message today. So today's gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna jump right into the message. We'll do some singing on the back end, some fabulous songs. We're all warmed up after the 9 o'clock service. So I just wanna jump right in. One of the disturbing things about Jesus in the first century, and one of the things that disturbed his first century followers, his disciples in particular, and really one of the things that kind of left them off balance, was Jesus had an oversized assumption about their ability and their ability to do things. So consequently, or it seemed like he did, because he would consistently, throughout the Gospels, he would put them in situations where there was really almost no way for them to win. He would just say, go do this, and I want to put you in this situation. And they would flail, and they would fail, and they would feel terrible. But over and over, he would just put them in situations where they weren't capable, and they weren't ready for it, and consequently, they struggle. And it's really kind of funny. Now, you have to read all 4 Gospels kind of in sequence to see these things dropped in there. We don't see it just with a cursory reading of the Gospels, but it's in there over and over. And honestly, and I'm sure we would have been the same way, they should have seen this coming, Because when Jesus invited his first disciples to join his little band of merry men, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, he said something that you probably heard before, that I'm sure they just kind of looked at each other like, what? And here's what he said. He says, I want you to come follow me, gentlemen. Come follow me, he said, and I will send you out to fish for people. Now, they were fishermen, right? So this is kind of, he's using their language. I want you to follow me away from the fishing business, and you're gonna fish for people. Or I'm gonna make you a fisher of men. That's sort of the language some of us grew up hearing. Now, the reason this should have tipped them off that they were in for the ride of their life is he's saying, I'm gonna make you fisher of men. And they've been out fishing all night for fish. And do you remember what they had caught fishing all night for fish, anybody?
Nothing.
Nothing, they had caught nothing. So of course they should be thinking, wait a minute, we aren't even all that good at fishing for fish, and you're gonna make us a fisher of men, whatever in the world that even is. Real, right? Again, they grew up around water. These guys were so familiar with the Sea of Galilee. They were boat people, they were lake people. And yet on a couple of occasions later, Jesus would take the same group of people as he gathered his disciples and put them in a boat and push them off into the lake and say, hey, I want you to row about 6 miles and then I'm gonna meet you on the other side. And on a couple of occasions, they weren't even able to row their boat across the Sea of Galilee, or the portion of Sea of Galilee that they had grown up around. And it was so frustrating. And then at the end, and there's so many examples of this, then at the end he gets them together and he says, very truly I tell you, or King James, verily, verily I say unto you. Some of us grew up with that. Very truly I tell you, he said, you are going to do the works that I have been doing. In other words, you're gonna do kinds of things you've seen me do, and you're gonna do even greater things than you've seen me doing. To which they must have thought, greater things? We couldn't even row our boat across 6 miles of the Sea of Galilee that we've done 100 times on a couple of occasions when you ask us to do that. I mean, he just way overestimated their capacity. And at times they struggled with this. Now, the reason he was doing this is he had a very compressed time period to teach them a very, very valuable lesson. And it's a valuable lesson that some of us have learned, some of us are learning, that every Jesus follower, I promise you, no matter how long you've been following Jesus, at some point along the way, you've already bumped into this or you will bump into this. It's the same lesson he was teaching the disciples. And that he was trying to teach them, look, your capacity is never gonna be enough for what I want you to do, but I want you to trust me. I just want you to trust me. When I nudge you beyond your capacity, when I nudge you beyond your education, when I nudge you beyond your experience, I want you to trust me. I just want you to trust me. Now, the most famous example of this, because it shows up in all 4 of the Gospels, the most famous example of this, and it's one, even if you're not a church person, you're familiar with the story probably, is one afternoon he's been teaching. In fact, he's been teaching all day. And one of the frustrating things about these little incidents to me is it doesn't say what he was teaching, but can you imagine going to an all-day seminar and Jesus is the only teacher? It's like an all-day conference, like sun comes up, you start, and you take breaks, restroom breaks, and you get some coffee and donuts, some snacks, and you sit back down. He'd been teaching all day, but the text doesn't tell us what he taught. That's frustrating to me. But anyways, teaching all day, the sun is beginning to go down, and the disciples, his 12 apostles, are hungry, but they're not gonna say, hey, Jesus, we're hungry. So they blame it on the rest of the folks. They say, hey, Jesus, I think we need to take a dinner break. So you should send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Now this is the moment, because Jesus just smiles and he's staring out at the crowd, and he turns to the disciples and he says, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. They don't need to go anywhere. You give them something to eat. To which I think the disciples thought, there he goes again. We'll come back to that in just a minute. If you've been tracking along with us, we're in part 3 of a series entitled Faithful, the subtitle being Fueling Our Faith in a World on Empty. And we've discovered in this series that Jesus' number 1 agenda for his first century followers and his number 1 agenda for you, his number 1 agenda for me, is not that we would simply believe things, but that we would develop an active gritty, real world, real relationship faith, a faith that actually does something, a faith that responds to real world circumstances as if we believe God is God is the God that Jesus revealed him to be, and that God actually loves us, and that God actually cares for us, and that from time to time God nudges us outside of our comfort zone, which explains why Jesus' initial invitation to his first century followers and to all of us were these two words: follow me. As in, I want you to move in and I want you to live in a different direction. And Jesus never altered or backed down on this invitation. In fact, his invitation to you, his invitation to me today in the 21st century is, I want you to follow me. Now, the church eventually kind of dumbed this down and watered this down a little bit. The church eventually backed it down to where it was just believe in me. And yes, Jesus asked people to believe in him, but not so they could just believe new things about him or God. Jesus invited people to believe in him so they would, in fact, follow him. But he was never content with people just changing their minds about who he was. The invitation was, now I want you to activate your confidence in me, and I want you to live in a different way. And I want you to live with a different kind of boldness. And I want you to live with a different kind of confidence. He invited us to live a life that actually reflects our confidence in God. And as it turns out, God is actually most honored, like you are. We've talked about this. God is most honored by living active here and now faith. We find this throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, that God is most honored when we believe God is who God has revealed himself to be, and especially as he's revealed himself through Jesus. And when we get those internal nudges to step out of our comfort zone and address something, forgive somebody, approach somebody, be more compassionate, be more generous, be more involved, take a slice of our time and devote it to serving somebody else. Whenever we step into that, God is honored by that act of faith, because faith isn't just something in our heads. That the kind of faith Jesus invited us into actually does something. And when our active or activated faith intersects with God's faithfulness on the other side, do you know what happens? Our faith gets bigger because we're exercising our faith. You already have the muscle, but it only grows if you exercise it. And that's what faith is. Faith is a muscle. And so we have been invited not to simply believe true things about God or believe true things about Jesus. We have been invited to live our lives as if those things really are true and that God can, in fact, be trusted. And believing, if we just decide to believe but not do, we end up with a feeble, frail, fragile, weak faith. And then when you need it, you don't have it. In fact, we talked about this last time. One of the reasons that you perhaps have lost faith or you're losing faith is it's always been right here. It's always been right here. And then somebody came along and gave you some different ideas and you put them right here and you lost your faith or you're losing your faith. And Jesus says, come on, I want you to live this. I want you to live this out, because every time you step out and trust me, and every time my Heavenly Father comes through for you and you experience his trustworthiness, your faith grows. So Jesus didn't simply invite people to believe things. He invited us to follow him, to ask this question. In fact, I put this question up a couple of weeks ago. Somebody screenshotted it and posted it on Instagram, and I love what they wrote underneath it. They said, I want to wake up every single morning with this question. And as a Jesus follower, I think that's a great idea. And the question is this: what would I do? What would I do? How would I respond? How would I react? What would I attempt? What would I initiate? What would I avoid? What would I step into? What would I step away from? How would I react? What would I do if I was absolutely confident that God is with me? What if you were absolutely confident that God is with you? What would be different in your life? How would you respond differently? How would you react? How would you engage if you were absolutely confident that God is with us? So what was happening in the Gospels, Jesus has a short amount of time to teach and to model for his disciples what it looks like to live in the real world as if God is with you. So in this series, we're asking and answering, hopefully answering the question, over the course of a lifetime, from children, as a child, all the way through adulthood. That's why I love what we do in our local churches. Throughout the seasons of life, what fuels or facilitates the development of active, enduring faith? That's the question we're asking in this series. What are the things, essentially, that God uses to grow up and blow up our faith? What are the things that God uses to build the kind of faith that shows up in our marriages, shows up in our finances, shows up in our communities, shows up with our neighbors, shows up with our response to our neighbors, shows up with our children, shows up with our values? What are the things that blow up and grow up that kind of faith? And based on our observation, based on the teaching of Jesus, and based on our communication and interviews and conversations with literally hundreds and hundreds of mature believers through the years, we've concluded there are 5 things God uses to grow our faith. Now, there may be more, but whenever we listen to someone tell their faith story, in fact, if you've been a Christian for some time and you were to just tell me your faith story, all 5 of these things would show up as things that God used to grow up and strengthen your faith. So last week we looked at the first one. We call it practical teaching. Practical teaching, and here's why. Because when people tell their faith story, they say, you know what? And then when I was in college, or then when I was in high school, or after I got married, for the first time in my life, I went to a church or a Bible study or a campus ministry or a home Bible study where for the first time in my life, someone opened the scripture and they didn't just tell me what to believe, they told me what to do with what I believe. For the first time in my life, they gave me handles. They gave me application. They gave me real world illustrations as to how this belief that was lodged in my head was supposed to show up in my life. So one of the things that grows our faith is practical application teaching, regardless of what the environment might be. When we're taught to, when we're just taught what to believe, that's one thing. But when somebody gives us handles and application, that's a whole different thing. And here's why it grows our faith. When our active faith, that is, we're like, okay, I'm gonna try this. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, I'm gonna see what happens. When our active faith intersects with God's faithfulness on the other side of our decision, our faith gets bigger. When we step in and say, okay, I'm gonna apologize. Okay, she doesn't deserve it, he doesn't deserve it, they don't deserve it, I'm going to forgive. Okay, I'm gonna trust God with a percentage of my income. Okay, I'm gonna get involved. When we step in and experience God's faithfulness on the other side, our faith gets bigger. When we experience God's faithfulness, we actually experience God. This is why many of you, if I were to ask you privately or even to come up here, you can tell a story. I'm gonna tell a couple in just a minute from my own life of God, of that very thing where you just felt like God nudged you into something you weren't prepared for, you weren't ready for, you weren't educated for, and you just said, okay, I'm not gonna resist any longer. And on the other side of that decision, God showed up in such a way that it is still emotional for you. In fact, it will always be emotional for you when you tell that story. So today, the second thing that grows up and blows up our faith, it's face. Or faith, or face. Yeah, okay, we face or faith, right? Well, the second thing that grows our faith, and it's very similar to practical application teaching, is personal ministry. We just call it personal ministry. Again, when people tell their stories, they don't just tell stories of being taught what to do. They tell stories of actually stepping into somebody else's story, of serving, of showing up at a nonprofit, making an invitation, going over to that neighbor's house. There's hundreds and hundreds of ways this shows up. But when people tell their story, they talk about the first time they stepped out and served somebody else or somebody else's in Jesus' name. Again, they stepped into their story. The story of a neighbor, again, a nonprofit that was doing great things in the community. It's like, I really feel like I should get involved. I don't know if they need me. I don't know if they need any help. I'm busy. I'm raising kids. But you know what? I just felt the nudge, and they tell that story. And you know what they say? Well, you do know what they say because many of you said these things the first time you did this. They say things like, I was so nervous. I was so nervous. I was in over my head. I got there and I thought, what am I doing here? I felt completely inadequate and unprepared. But then they say things like this. We all say things like this, but I just knew this is what God wanted me to do. And I wanted to back out, and I got there and I wondered, why in the world did I sign up for this? Everybody here is smarter than me. Everybody knows all the right answers. What if I say it wrong? But I went ahead, when they tell their story, they say, I went ahead and I did it anyway. And the reason that that's part of their faith story is because on the other side of that decision, they experienced God's faithfulness. As it turns out, I didn't know what I was doing. And the fact that I didn't know what I was doing, God used that to do something that perhaps he couldn't have done if I had known what I was doing. You know, as it turns out, I didn't have all the answers. But because I was there, I learned answers to questions I never even knew there were answers for. So on the other side of that decision to trust God and to step into somebody else's life and somebody else's story, their faith got bigger. They experienced God's faithfulness. And here's why, because pushing through our inadequacy, and we all have inadequacy, right? Pushing through our inadequacy in order to say yes to God for the benefit of other people always grows our faith 100% of the time. And while I'm saying all this, some of you, I'm sure, watching online or sitting in the room with me today, some of you are thinking, how did he know? How did he know? Because you've been wrestling. There's been, there's this thing in your neighborhood. There's this thing in the community. There's this thing at your kid's school. There's this thing at the church. There's this, and you're so bothered. You're so concerned. Something needs to be done. Somebody's invited you to do it, but you're busy and you're raising kids and, you got all these excuses like we all do. But that nudge just won't cease or desist. And of course you're resisting. That's the point. This was the point in the Gospels when Jesus says to his disciples, I need you to do this. I need you to step into this. I need you to get involved with this. I need you to try this. And they're just like, we can't do it. And Jesus is like, that's the point. You can't, trust me. Step in anyway. And here's the thing. When we do this, we have and you've heard me say this so many times, but it's just true. When we trust God practically, when we make that call, when we sit down and say, I'm sorry, when we have that awkward conversation, when we show up, we have no idea what hangs in the balance of that decision. We really don't know what's on the other side. We think we do at times, but we don't know what or who hangs in the balance of our decision to trust God and to step in anyway. But one thing for sure hangs in the balance, your faith. Because when you say yes, and when you experience God, when we experience God on the other side, our faith gets stronger. Our faith becomes a more enduring, durable faith. If you don't believe me, just ask Jesus' 12 apostles. Back to the story. So here's what happens. So they're out there on the hillside, and they say to Jesus, Lord, send those crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves something to eat. We don't have enough food to feed them. And Jesus says, they do not need to go away. You guys give them something to eat. And those guys just stood there and stared at each other like, again, what's he talking about? Now, a little backstory to what's happening here, because this is kind of fascinating and it kind of sets us up for what happens next. And this is the part of the story you probably don't know. Right before this incident, Jesus is kind of doing his Jesus thing, and he gets word that John the Baptist, remember John the Baptist? John the Baptist is the predecessor to Jesus. John the Baptist is the one that got the people ready. It's like, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. Then Jesus shows up. Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Nazareth, please welcome. It wasn't exactly like that. So John the Baptist, introduced Jesus to the crowd. John the Baptist was considered a prophet and a renegade and a man of God, very popular. But John the Baptist couldn't keep his mouth shut. And so John the Baptist said some nasty things about Herod Antipas and his wife that used to be married to Herod Antipas's brother. Okay, don't think about that for too long, okay? That's a little creepy now. Well, it was against the law back then, okay? You weren't allowed to marry, a woman wasn't allowed to marry her husband's brother, but Herodias, that was her name, actually married Herod Antipas. Now, Herod Antipas is the governor of the northern part of what we would call the Holy Land. And back then, it's just Galilee. And so Herod Antipas was very upset with John the Baptist because John the Baptist wouldn't keep his mouth shut, and when he would see him, he would make comments out loud, hey, you're living with your brother's wife. You're living with your brother's wife. Well, Herodias didn't like this either, so he has John the Baptist arrested. Now, this upsets the Galileans because they consider John the Baptist a prophet and a man of God. So he has him in prison. He doesn't know what to do with him because he doesn't want to execute him because he really hasn't done anything that deserves execution. But his wife is like, we need to get rid of this guy. I hate this guy, because of course she felt terrible because I won't go into all the seedy part of this. So anyway, so what happens is, so Herod Antipas has this party with a bunch of his guy friends. And he invites some dancers in. And Herodias Herod Antipas's new wife, the ex-wife of his brother, has a daughter by Philip, Herod Antipas's, so it's basically his niece. She sends her daughter in to dance, she's a teenager, to dance in front of Herod Antipas and all of his guy friends. And it was amazing, okay? It was so amazing, they were all drunk. So they're just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. So Herod Antipas says in front of all of his friends to Herodias' daughter who did the dance, oh, that was so amazing, I'll give you anything. Just name what you want. What do you want? Thinking she's gonna ask for cash or maybe a car, right? And she looks at Herod Antipas. See, you should read the Bible. You didn't even know this was in there, did you? It's amazing. Okay, so she looks at Herod Antipas and she says, excuse me, and she leaves the little, the guy, the man cave there, wherever they were, and she goes and finds her mom. She says, okay, we got him. What do you want? She says, you go in there and you tell Herod that I want John the Baptist's head. You go in there and tell him that you want John the Baptist's head on a meat platter. So they're in there having a party, and here comes, sweet teenage girl, sweet-ish anyway, and says, hey, okay, I got it. And he's pulling out his wallet, and she's like, I would like John the Baptist's head on a meat platter. Well, now he has said this in front of all of his friends. He can't back down. So he has John the Baptist executed, as a result of sort of this drunken party thing. So all this word gets back to Jesus, and Jesus, of course, is devastated. I mean, John the Baptist was his guy. He was probably a relative. We know that John the Baptist's mom and Mary, the mother of Jesus, they were super close friends. So this is terrible, terrible news. Jesus and his disciples, they were just bewildered. Now, to kind of dip into our life a little bit, Jesus' 12 apostles, they were really bewildered by this because they had seen Jesus show up at a party and turn water into wine. I mean, who cares? And that's just kind of a magic trick. It's like just fun, right? Oh, that's amazing. They had seen Jesus use his power to heal strangers, people he didn't even know. And here's John the Baptist, like an important person in the story, an important person to Jesus, who was arrested and beheaded, and Jesus didn't lift his finger to do anything to help John the Baptist. That makes no sense to them. Now, the reason I wanted to go down that rabbit trail and come back for just a minute is that this should encourage us, because from time to time, God's activity or God's lack of activity in our lives makes no sense at all. And I just want you to know, Jesus did the same thing on purpose with a purpose. And it was the flip side of, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you trust me? So anyway, so Jesus gets this horrible news. The disciples get this horrible news, and what do? They go to the lake. That's what they did. They went to the lake. So here's what the text says. When Jesus heard what happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. So he gets on a boat, and they go as far north, as far away from Herod Antipas and his crowd as possible. He wants to be alone, wants to recuperate. He wants to, take a break because, he's constantly surrounded by people. And I've shared this with you before. In those days, if you were surrounded by a crowd, how do you get away? You jump on a donkey? It's like, all right, let's get out of here, and people are walking alongside like, okay, you can't, there's no helicopters, there's no tricked out Escalades, you just can't escape the crowd, right? The only way to escape the crowd, this is why Jesus spent so much time around the Sea of Galilee until he went south to Jerusalem to die, is he could escape the crowd. So he gets in a boat, they row across this, part of the lake, and when they get to the other side, guess who's waiting for them? Here's what the text says. Hearing this, the crowds just followed him on foot. It's like, yep, we know where he's going. We know where he's going. They're headed to follow him on foot from the town. And when Jesus landed and saw these large crowds, he was so frustrated. No, so amazing. He had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. And he stays all day and he teaches. And as evening approaches, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place and it's already getting late. And here we are. Send the crowds away. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. So the disciples basically asked Jesus to do something. And Jesus, in turn, asked the disciples to participate in what they've asked Jesus to do. You give them. He says, you give them something to eat. Jesus invites them to be a solution to the problem. A problem, of course, that was impossible for them to solve. In fact, John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John also records this account. Here's what John said. John, who was there, who later on apparently, sort of interviewed this out of Jesus. John said, you know what? Jesus did this to test us. That's what John says in the Gospel of John. Jesus actually did this to test us, and Jesus knew what he was gonna do all along. He had this whole thing worked out, but what whole thing worked out? This was just another way of Jesus trying to get his disciples to step out of their adequacy into something they could not do to experience God's faithfulness or Jesus' faithfulness on the other side. So anyway, so they're standing around like, okay, what do you mean you give them something to eat? And then Andrew speaks up. Andrew says, well, I was named after Andrew, so I kind of like this part of the story. Andrew says, well, I don't know where we're gonna get enough food to feed all these thousands of people, but there's a kid here, and he has offered us his lunch, and so, I don't know, we could just start with this. What if we just start with this? And Jesus looks and the disciples look. Andrew says, I know it's not a lot. In fact, it's only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Now, if you haven't been paying attention, you gotta pay attention to this part of the story. What Jesus says next is amazing. I love his response because this is how big problems get solved. This is how big issues get addressed. This is how the world changed. This is how the world continues to change, and this is how communities change, and this is how we change. And what Jesus says next is actually an invitation to you and to you. And this is an invitation to you, and this is an invitation to all of us. Jesus smiles at the little boy and says, bring them here. I love this. Bring them here. Talking about the fish and the loaves. Bring them here to me. Just bring those here to me. Bring me what you got. Bring me what you have. And there we stand with our loaves and our fish. And some of us have more loaves than fish, and some of us have more fish than loaves, and some of us don't have any loaves and just fish, and we don't all have the same thing and the same capacity and the same education, the same background, same things going for us. That's what makes the invitation so powerful. Just bring me what you got. Just bring me what you got. Do you want me to do something? We do. Well, I want you to participate in it. Just bring me what you got. Sometimes I ask you, I'll say, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? And something comes to mind, something in the school system, something in your community, something in the world, something in your family or extended family. What breaks your heart? Jesus says, what breaks your heart? Bring me what you got. What breaks your heart? I can't do anything about that. Bring me what you got. What breaks your heart? Yeah, okay, just bring me what you got. Is it the next generation? Faith of the next generation? That's what breaks my heart sometimes. In fact, that's a big thing that just hangs over me all the time. What, your neighbor, your neighbor's marriage, your neighbor's kids, university students, something in the community? What breaks your heart? What would you like to see God do different? Jesus says, bring me what you got. There they stand, staring at each other like, all right. And Andrew, hands Jesus the lunch box, with the fish and thinks to himself, well, this should be interesting. But every day with Jesus is interesting. Text says, and Jesus directed the people to sit down on the grass. You know this part of the story. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. I love this. This is so great. That's why the Gospels are so great. He looks up to heaven and he gave thanks. Okay, I gotta tell you what's going on here. This is so great. Every once in a while, Jesus will pray a little short prayer just to make sure everybody knows who he's connected to. This is one of those times. Remember outside Lazarus' tomb, Lazarus has been dead 4 days. Again, talk about disappointing, God not coming through. Hey, Lazarus, Jesus, your friend Lazarus is sick. And they all get up to go, check on Lazarus. Jesus says, sit back down. We're not going. Why aren't we going? We're gonna wait for him to die. I say, wait, what? Yeah, we're gonna wait for him to die, break Mary and Martha's heart, then we'll go. It's like, but I thought you were Jesus. I am Jesus, this is what I do. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, I'm up to something you're not aware of. Anyway, so he's standing outside of Lazarus' tomb. This is so great. And he's about to do this miracle, and he knows what he's gonna do, and God the Father knows what he's gonna do, and then Jesus prays this little short prayer, and the prayer kind of goes like this. Dear Heavenly Father, you know what you're about to do. You know what I'm about to do. I'm just talking to you so they know that I'm connected to you. You ready? Here we go. Boom, Lazarus come forth. It's great. So that's what this is. So he looks up, he knows what he's gonna do. John told us, I found out later, he had the whole thing planned out. He's trying to teach us to trust him and step into what we know we're inadequate for. Taking the 5 loaves and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves and then he gave them to the disciples. Now what? This is the point. Do you know what they did? They did what they knew to do. They did what they knew to do and trusted that Jesus knew what he was up to. They did what they knew how to do, and they trusted that Jesus was going to somehow come through. They just did what they knew how to do and trusted that God was up to something. And that on the other side of this decision, they wouldn't look like fools. They literally walked by faith. I mean, Christians throw this phrase around all the time. It just drives me nuts because walking by faith isn't, I have an idea and I'm going to initiate the idea and trust God. That is not walking by faith. That is presuming on God. Walking by faith is, I don't think I can, I don't think I'm ready, but God is nudging me and I don't know how this is gonna work out and I don't think it's gonna work out and I'm gonna look like a fool, but I can't say no, you just won't leave me alone. I'm gonna step out into this. They walked into the crowd, literally. They walked by faith, hoping that God would come through. And of course, in the disciples, he gave them to the disciples, the food, and the disciples then gave them to the people that just did what they knew to do. And their activated faith intersected with God's faithfulness, and something remarkable took place. And so the story ends this way, and they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. Now, when I read this, and when I think about you, when I think about us, and when I think about this is so personal for me. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is my story. Because once upon a time, 25 and a half years ago, there was a handful of us, and we just felt like we were supposed to start a different kind of church, a kind of church that people had tried and failed, and we were told it won't work in the Southeast. We wanted to create a church that unchurched people would love to attend, and a church that people could bring their unchurched friends and not be offended by silly things, but just offended by the fact that you're a sinner, Christ died for your sin, rose from the dead to prove that he could make that claim. That's it. If you're gonna be offended, that's all we want to offend you with, all right? And so we wanted to start a different kind of church again. And I know you look at all this stuff and lights and TV and campuses everywhere, but I'm telling you, 25 and a half years ago, it felt like this. So it's always emotional for me. It's emotional every time I see somebody baptized in one of our churches and hear one of the stories. Every time I drive over the hill and see this property. I've never gotten over it. You just don't ever get over it because you know your own inadequacy. And you know you're just, okay, I'm gonna give you what I have. And then when you experience God's faithfulness, there's no room for pride. There's no room for arrogance. I didn't do this. The disciples didn't do that. And that's the point, that your Heavenly Father invites us in. And then, that was like 25 years ago. Then about 10 years ago, I'm thinking, hey, everything's great. And then Sandra and I told you this, we felt this nudge that we're supposed to become foster parents. I'm like, oh, no. I am so busy. I'm doing the Lord's work. We're busy, we got, and the nudge just wouldn't cease and desist. There was just this nudge. And were we prepared? Did we have the emotion? No. We went through the training and then we knew we weren't prepared, I said, okay, we'll give you what we got. We got extra bedrooms and some financial margin. So that's what we got. And oh my goodness. Yeah, we've had kids in and out of our home. What God has done for me and my faith and my confidence in God and my love for God through that process, it goes way beyond any good that was done for children who've been in and out of our home. In fact, I was talking to Sandra earlier today about this, and it's just emotional. It's always emotional because there's it's gonna be a free fall, and we can't, and then, and here's the thing. I want this for every single one of you. I don't care if it has anything to do with our local church. I want you to experience it. And I don't want you to, here's the thing, I don't want you to spend your whole Christian life believing a bunch of stuff and never activating that faith. Because that's not what Jesus invited you to do. It's not what he invited me to do. I'm so glad we stepped out. I am so glad we got out of our comfort zone. I'm so glad we said, okay, we'll give you what we got. Don't blame us if we mess this up. So I want you to say this with me. Would you? Even if you're sitting at home alone or if you're with a group of people, would you just say this out loud with me, okay? I'll do what I can do. Would you say that with me? It's not a trick. I'm not gonna, say, and there, this one more time. Just one more time. Ready? That is the walk of faith. And here's the second part. I'll do what I can do and trust God to do what only he can do. Let's just say this together. If you're a Jesus follower, this is the thing. This is the tension. This is how your faith gets big. This is how the world changes. This is how you participate in changing something significant. So everybody all together, out loud, ready? I'll do what I can do and trust God to do what only he can do. That's what it looks like to walk by faith. That is the walk that builds your faith. Now, back to the story. I'll wrap this up. You're not gonna believe this. You have to look it up. It's in Matthew. Do you know what Jesus does next? I mean, imagine this. All these people are fed. It's been a miracle. There's like, whoa, did you see what I just did? It's like we started with this and we fed. I mean, they've got to be basking in their glory, and they've just eaten and everybody is satisfied. Matthew, who's there, in his gospel says this: immediately, I love that it starts with immediately. Immediately, Jesus rounds them up. All right, let's go. They're like, wait a minute, this is kind of nice. And he's like, no, I don't want you thinking you did something. Immediately, he takes them back down to the edge of the lake. He forces them. There's like this urgency and there's tension. He makes them get on the boat, and then he pushes the boat out into the sea once again. I mean, they're still wiping breadcrumbs off their face. It's like, what happened? Get in the boat, pushes them out, says, I want about 8 miles. I'll see you on the other side, and sends them into another impossible situation. Another impossible situation that finally Peter connects the dots. In fact, one of the gospel writers says the problem with them being on the lake, they still hadn't learned the lesson. They still hadn't learned the lesson of the breadcrumbs, of the bread basket. They were still trying to figure out, okay, this isn't about us. It's not about us being ready. It's about when our Heavenly Father and our Savior urges us to do something, we just do it and we trust him with the outcome. Again, only Peter was able to connect the dots in that story, but that's another story for another day. Then, imagine this. A year later, they're all together again. Jesus has been crucified. He's risen from the dead. They're standing on another hillside. It's the 12 of them plus about 50 women who've supported Jesus and some extra friends. And Jesus stands on a hillside and he hands off responsibility for the entire enterprise to this same group of people. He says, all right, here's what you're gonna do. You are gonna go make disciples of all nations. They're like, okay, we've never even left our nation. I've only traveled about 80 miles from home, and that's only because you kept dragging me up and down from Galilee to Jerusalem. It's like, wait, this band of people is gonna make disciples or create Jesus followers of all nations? Jesus, I don't know how to break it to you. That's impossible. Oh yeah, that was impossible. Row, row, row your boat was impossible till Jesus showed up. I tell you what, we'll just do what we know to do, and we'll trust you to do what only you can do. And here we are. Here's the thing, and I'm done. Every Jesus follower finds themselves wrestling with this tension eventually, and that's a good thing. And I don't want you to miss it. You're gonna sense that nudge to lead, to step in, to serve, to sign up, to go out, to go on some sort of a trip. Some of you remember your first Global X trip. You're bringing your passport to church. Why am I bringing my passport? What am I doing? And then you get back home and it's like, I'll never see the world the same way again. And when it comes, you won't know what's gonna happen on the other side, and you don't know what hangs in the balance of whether or not you say yes or no, but the one thing for sure you know hangs in the balance is the strength and the endurance of your faith. Because when our faith intersects with God's faithfulness, our faith gets bigger. And when you say yes, perhaps somebody else's faith is gonna get bigger as well. Because personal ministry positions us to experience God's power in our weakness. That's the point. That's why our faith gets bigger. Personal ministry positions us. It positions us to experience God's faithfulness in response to our acts, our little bitty, itty bitty acts of faith. So if you want go the distance faith, if you want enduring faith, if you want faith that actually makes a difference in the real world, this is how it happens. you have to say yes to that still small voice. You have to say yes to that nudge before you're ready, because you'll never be ready. Before you know what's gonna happen, because you don't ever know exactly what's gonna happen, other than the fact that your faith on the other side will be stronger. And these will be the stories that you tell for the rest of your life. The folks who said yes, those are the people, those are the folks that changed the world. The folks that didn't say yes, we don't know their names. Perhaps you know someone who said yes to that nudge, and that's why you're here. Perhaps you know someone who said yes to that nudge, and it changed your world. And now you have an opportunity to do for somebody else what that person did for you. It won't be the same way, it won't look the same way, but it's the same dynamic. Because somewhere in the world, there is someone whose life, whose child, whose grandchild, whose marriage will be changed. Who would change once you step up and make available to God what you got. Once you step up and make yourself available, once you step up and say, God, this is all I got, but if you can use this, I want you to know it is 100% available to you. So, regardless of what happens within the context of our local church, here's the thing. I want you to do what you can do and trust God to do what only God can do. That's it. I want you to do what you know you can do and trust God to do what only God can do. That's how the world changes. That's how communities change. That's how lives are changed. This is how it works. This is the thing. This is what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so today, to all of us, he says, just bring me what you got. Bring me what you got. Bring me what you got. Together, we'll do something that you would have never anticipated happening. You'll experience something you would have never experienced any other way, and on the other side of it, your faith will be bigger, stronger, and bolder. So, let's bring them what you got. And we will pick it up right there next time in part 4 of Faithful. Now, before we go, not 3 questions, not 2 questions, just 1 question. And it circles back around to where we started our time today. And the question is simply this. Here's the question. Are you planning to serve in your local church this season? It's that simple. Do you have a plan to serve in your local church during this season? I hope so. And at this time, I'm gonna invite the local church pastors of all of our Atlanta area churches and all of our churches really all over the country who are joining us today to step up and explain what that looks like in your local church. So would you please welcome your lead pastor? That would be me. Okay, so I just welcome myself. So here's the now, if you're online, hey, if you're watching online, I need you to stay with us because this is so important because we only have about 1/3 of the people that normally attend on a Sunday, so this is so important. As you came in, you got a card. If you got the card, pull that card out real quick. Everybody got the card? It was underneath your seat. You got a pen? Everybody pull out your card, your pen, okay? And this is what I want you to do. I want all of you who consider North Point Community Church your local church, and those of you who are online, I'm gonna tell you how to participate in a minute. In fact, if you wanna pull up another browser page, or if you're watching on Roku or Apple TV, get your phone out and just go to northpoint.org/serve. And I want all of you, to pick one of these 4 areas and put a check box in, and put a check mark, and then give us a little bit of information. And we're gonna send you an invitation to a gathering where we're just gonna tell you a little bit more about one of these 4 areas. Now, let me just set your mind at ease, okay? We need greeters, we need welcomers, we need people who sign people up, we need storytellers, we need small group leaders, we need all kinds of people in these 4 areas of family ministry. But we can't hit the ground running as we transition into summer, but specifically as we transition into fall, if we don't have about 350 new inadequate people, okay? You have to be inadequate. You can't be prepared. You gotta be stepping in over your head. That's who we're looking for, okay? Those are the people that just come in with fresh eyes and fresh ideas and make our environments better, and then God does amazing things, okay? So here are your 4 choices, okay? Wombaland is birth. This is basically birth in our infants, and I just want you to know, we do not babysit. We don't have a nursery, okay? We are setting an anchor in the hearts of little ones that's gonna secure them to their faith for the rest of their life, and you get to participate in that. Upstreet is our elementary age kids, preparing kids for the road ahead. That's why we call it Upstreet. And in Upstreet, this is where kids begin to embrace and hear for the first time some of these Bible stories that they're gonna know for the rest of their life, and you're gonna have an opportunity to share with those kids, sign their parents up, roam the halls, Storytel. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff that we need people to do in Upstreet. Then Transit, as I talked about earlier, is our middle school environment. I love the focus of Transit. It's giving kids a faith of their own, helping kids develop a faith of their own. You remember middle school, and it was crazy, and it's such a transition time, and it's one of the most, all of these are so significant, but because of the transitions that happen now in our culture in middle school, this is one of the most important things we do, and it's one of the most interesting groups of children you'll ever be around. I'll leave it with that. So we're looking for some men and women who would host, who would lead small groups, and again, just invest in that next generation. And then Inside Out is our high school ministry. Being here with our seniors Thursday night just reminded me how important high school is in terms of the transition, especially as they move towards seniors. So we're looking for some men and women who want to invest in the next generation. You remember high school. You remember how different your high school years could have been if you had had someone like you who would be willing to just invest a little bit of time. So we want you to pick an area. Then we're going to contact you today. You can use the QR code if you'd rather not write on the card. For those of you at home, just go to northpoint.org/serve, northpoint.org/serve. For those of you who are already serving, here's what we would love for you to do. We would love for you to take a picture of the card and send it to someone that you know would be great in one of these environments, or just send in the link, northpoint.org/serve, send in the link and say, hey, would you come serve with me? Would you be willing to come serve with me? We're gonna collect these on the way out. I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes to fill out that card if you haven't already, and then we're gonna sing a little bit, and then we're gonna get you on your way. So please, please, please participate with us, and you will be contacted today. Ready? Go. Bill, you wanna add anything? Wumbaland. Bill says go Wumbaland.
I can't figure out why I'm feeling so alone. Never really know why. All I think about is how bad it could go. When I really don't know, no. I get these thoughts inside my head. What if I don't have what it takes? What if things don't ever change? Don't leave room for you, but what if you're holding me up? What if your love is enough? What if the power in your name could do anything? And what if you're making me strong? What if you were here all along? What if I'm right where you want me? Everything I'm going through.
All right, you can keep working on those. Make sure you drop them off as you head out of here. Thank you so much. Now we're gonna sing I Love This first song. Love Has a Name. Heard it a few years ago, and it's been one of my favorites. Allison's gonna come lead. So if you would stand and let's celebrate our Savior who has called us out into that scary, scary place where we actually make a big, big difference. Here we go.
There's a space in every beating heart. There's a longing that reaches past the stars. There's an answer to every question mark. There's a name. Yeah. And there's a hope that's flowing through these veins. And there's a voice that echoes through the pain. There's an ember that's ready for the flame. There's a name, and we will fix our eyes on the one who overcame. We will stand in awe of the one who breaks the chain. Let's sing. Love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus. Oh, love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus. There's a joy triumphs over fear, and there's a laughter that wipes away all tears, and there's a presence that changes atmospheres. There's a name, so we will fix our eyes on the one who overcame. Oh yes, and we will stand in awe of the one who breaks the chains. Love has a name. Love has a name. Jesus. And my joy has a name. Joy has a name. Jesus. And my victory has a name. Oh, victory has a name. Jesus. Oh, love has a name. Love has a name.
Y'all sound so good. Let's keep singing together. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Sing Jesus. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. He's worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Sing it again. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord.
Well, North Point, we're so grateful that you came and worshiped with us today. We hope that you have an incredible week, and as you do, as you leave today, make sure that you use all the available exits that we have, and don't forget to take your card and drop it in one of those buckets at the exit. We will see you right back here next Sunday. We hope you have a fantastic day.
Nothing could ever change the way you feel about me. No, nothing is better than seeing you smile. Just 'cause I'm your child.
Yeah, hands high, yeah, we keep our hands high. Knowing that we beautiful in the Lord's sight, ayy. Hands high, yeah, we put our hands high. Giving praises to the one,
I'm
ayy.
perfectly made. I'm perfectly made. You see something great that you are part of. When they see a waist, you see a diamond in the rough. You don't make mistakes. I'm perfectly made. And I'm perfectly loved. I'm perfectly made. everything will be